Welcome to everyone around the world, and thank you for joining the live broadcast today. My name again is James Alliband. I'm the Senior Security Strategist at VMware. I'm really excited to join you all today and to talk to you about the Global Security Insights Report 2021. Now, just before I do introduce my guest today, I want to, of course, remind you that we've got the Q&A running. So, of course, you'll be able to ask your questions. We want to dedicate some time at the end of the session today to ask for all of you to be able to ask any questions. And, of course, then we'll be able to answer them with the guests. But with no further ado, let's introduce my guests. The two people that are going to be joining us today, first off, is Rick McElroy and also Tom Kellermann. Rick is our Principal Cybersecurity Strategist at VMware, and Tom is the Head of Cybersecurity at VMware. Guys, welcome and thank you for joining me today. Guys, as always, great to have you. And as you know, of course, it's a pleasure not only to be sitting on this virtual platform today with you both again, after around about 5 weeks since our last session. But just before we jump into talking why we're here today about the report, I just want to level set a little bit and give our audience a real kind of landscape of where we're sitting today, and just pick your brains for a second. What do you think has been the biggest cybersecurity event to happen over the last, let's say, 12 to 18 months? TK, I don't know if you want to start off.
I think the attack on Microsoft, which was retribution for the TrickBot takedown and other proactive measures Microsoft has taken globally. The attack on Microsoft on O365 environments and Exchange servers was of the most significance to me.
How about yourself, Rick?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'll go with the easy answer. SolarWinds, obviously our binary-based supply chain being at risk. But I think we probably don't know what the most impactful one is yet, because I'm going to guess there's a bunch of incident response engagements that are occurring. I'm going to bet that a bunch of people are missing visibility for their home networks. And so I imagine if we fast forward a few months, we'll hear about another huge impact that we didn't see coming.
I like that. I think that's a great point as well, is we probably don't know. And that's the reality of the situation we're sitting in today. And it moves us really nicely into the fact of, the disruption of the pandemic, along with ultimately all of the teams and our listeners' teams working from anywhere, really resulted in a surge of sophisticated cyber attacks and material breaches. Security teams, of course, we know now, and we've seen this for the last 15 months, the challenges that we've seen over securing an anywhere workforce, and really the prioritization of that as well, which I think is really important. Something I've spoke about a lot, and I've just released an article on LinkedIn around it, is around the blind spots and the lack of visibility, just highlighting vulnerabilities. It's just paramount in organizations' networks. It's a scary fact that we live in today. Rick, do you want to just introduce the report and who we surveyed?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think one of the things, and you'll hear this from TK, myself, James, our threat team, one of the things that we try to do is base ourselves in reality. So what we're trying to determine is the actual cyber ground truth from organizations, from leaders of those organizations, to figure out not only what attackers are doing, but how we should best position our products to prevent, detect, and respond to those attacks. So this particular effort, we went out to 3,500 CIOs, CTOs, and CISOs from 14 different countries and regions. It spanned EMEA, APJ, and North America. And one of the things I wanted to point out here is a lot of times you'll see these surveys based strictly around CISOs or information security leaders. We thought it was hugely valuable and hugely important to go out and talk to the CIOs, to the CTOs, to understand their positions. As we know, as security defenders, not everyone has a CISO. A lot of times those roles are assumed by CTOs and CIOs. And for the first time ever, we think CTOs and CIOs are now highly aware of the risks to their environments that they've built and the digital transformation that underlies all of that. And they are moving as fast as possible to respond. And so we hope the results of this survey help power your teams and help give you that critical information to go back to your organization and justify some of these strategic security projects.
Absolutely. And TK, from the results and What was some of the highlights for you that you were really looking to get out of the report, but something that really elevated for you as you started to look through the results?
In my 22 years of being in cybersecurity, I really feel that there's been an awakening amongst CIOs and CTOs, a come to Jesus per se, that essentially sustainable digital transformation is dependent upon cybersecurity and vigilance in how they develop products, in how they deploy products, and how they manage vulnerabilities in products. It's a huge shift. Now the offensive coordinator per se is believing in defense, and some of their priorities that we'll discuss in a minute are of paramount importance for the long-term sustainability, again, of their digital transformation efforts. Worst case scenario has changed, just like we described earlier with SolarWinds or the Microsoft hits. The adversary now wants to take over the environment. They want to commandeer your digital transformation. And so some of their priorities and how to best manage that and mitigate that illustrate that they've come to Jesus.
I absolutely couldn't agree more. And I think one of the interesting facts as well I've certainly seen and resonates to me is, over the last 14, 15 months, I really believe that the cards have been put on the bad actors table. They're choosing their time to strike. They're choosing their dwell time and how long they want to sit. Many organizations are ultimately sitting with vulnerabilities or bad actors in their network and they don't know about it. And I think that's so scary. But at the same time, it's about, we've got an opportunity to do something about that. And that's, again, that ground truth that we spoke about. And let's talk about the results. I bring these results in. It's a good time to dive into those. For me, one of the first results I saw when I picked out the report was 2.35% of organizations have had breaches reported in the past year. 2.35% of the results, which I thought was just a fascinating result when we think about what we're dealing with and also the pandemic and the shift through the pandemic to remote working landscape. Rick, how about yourself? What was the result that really came out to you and you kind of took a moment and said, wow, that's huge?
Yeah, well, look, I think there's some things in there that are no-brainers, right? Ransomware, a big problem, shocker. Everyone's battling with ransomware right now, right? But what I saw manifest in the report that I had heard anecdotally, across the last 18 months of virtual webinars, virtual roundtables, virtual events, really meeting with our CISO partners, our CISO prospects, and then our CISO customers. I started to hear this very early on in the pandemic, this idea that the majority of folks on a roundtable had said they were a cloud-first security shop. And I was a little shocked with that because if you rewind the tape to 2018, most of the conversations where CISOs were absolutely not. I am not going to buy a cloud-based security solution. The cloud's not ready. The pandemic highlighted a number of areas that on-prem solutions started to break down. And so what I found fascinating is 98% of all respondents said they are currently using or plan on using a cloud-first security strategy. And I think that's important for a number of reasons. It actually changes how our programs look, the processes that go along with those, how we're going to do incident response. And so what we really have to do is, if that is the future and the current present, well, we've got to revamp a whole bunch of process and a whole bunch of tech to make sure that that minimizes the risk of cloud breaches and things like island hopping that TK likes to talk about a lot.
Absolutely.
On both those points, James, to your point, of these thousands of organizations that participated in this study, on average, the majority of them suffered 2 or more breaches in the past year. And what's most important is these were material in nature, and their greatest concern was the reputational damage of the breach. But when we discuss the construct of island hopping, which I do like to talk about quite a bit, the reputational risk factor is significant. But imagine if your corporation and your corporate network begins to attack your customers, or begins to attack your constituency, or begins to attack regulators in your space. It's quite significant. And to Rick's point, yes, they are adopting a cloud-first security strategy, but they are also very concerned with the security of the cloud. And so workload security is now an imperative to these organizations.
Yeah, in fact, TK, that was the number one highlight, deficiency in the report is better workload security because it's the most vulnerable part of the cloud.
Absolutely. And we think about exactly with that, we're ultimately having to shift applications to the cloud. We're having to host those applications somewhere. And yet we ultimately fear and know that the security in place is just not good enough, quite frankly, in that perspective. And also seeing the fact that 79% have said that attacks have grown more sophisticated over the last 12 months, and haven't we just seen that? And again, Rick, if you want to talk to SolarWinds a bit more, I think that just highlighted exactly that issue in itself.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, you teed up a couple of these things earlier, James, right? Which is the amount of investment up front in an attack that attackers are doing, right? And we have to remember and be aware that there is large data sets that include everything from system assets, because that information has been access mined and sold on the dark web. So they have a whole lot of intel on what our systems are doing. They have a whole lot of intel on the people. They're able to better leverage those to get better efficacy on something like a spearfish. But what we're also seeing, I'm going to kick this over to TK in a second, is like it's not just about landing the piece of malware inside the environment, right? Like that's step one. Step two is start to do something like reverse business email compromise, living off the land inside of those inboxes, understanding the communication flows, who's responsible for wire transfers, etc. Now the attackers are then going to leverage your own internal communications against you. In fact, we've seen this go out to partners where they start serving up some of your partners with phishing attacks. And oh, by the way, if I'm billing a direct customer, that has a way higher chance of efficacy than if some random person hits my inbox, right? So TK, talk a little bit about RBAC. We know the Russians kind of pioneered it. Now everyone's doing it. But what's the real risk and exposure there, especially with something like, the exchange breach that you talked about earlier?
Yeah, this is why I highlighted Microsoft earlier. Turla pioneered this technique about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's really reverse business email compromise. Means they take over the administrative control of your O365 environment or your Exchange servers, and they push selective fileless malware attacks against the board of directors, against the most senior executives from within your own environment, just so they can get footholds in those environments. They're also doing things that are quite significant that I would ascertain to be an escalation of sorts. Counter-incident response is occurring over 60% of the time, but one way it manifests is what's called a Chronos attack, where they're manipulating the value of time associated with the logs when they're in environments. But if you think about the importance of time across all operations, across all missions, and if someone were to begin to manipulate time beyond Active Directory, but time, let's say the value of capital, the value of trades, the value of time as it relates to transportation systems, we have to appreciate that integrity attacks are now the name of the game. And they may begin as small integrity attacks, but they can become truly systemic and destructive in nature, as we've seen evidenced by recent events.
Absolutely. I think bringing in again the pandemics, I think is a really important point. We've suffered a year, or just over a year now, of something that we certainly didn't expect and we certainly didn't prepare for. I think that's really important from that. But Rick, I think I know it's a big interest and a topic that you talk about a lot. And one of the statistics that came out to me, which I think was just truly terrifying to a certain extent, was that 19% of the healthcare sector breaches were as a result of ransomware. And do you want to just talk about that a little bit more, especially in light of the last 12 months?
Yeah, look, my healthcare provider right now is still battling adversaries. Right. I've had unavailable patient data for months at this point. And I don't say that to pick on them. Right. I say that because that's the reality that anybody in healthcare faces right now. It's a rough, bumpy road for everybody in healthcare. And, I do want to caveat this by saying it's generally speaking not their faults. Right. So when you look at healthcare, we've prioritized compliance over security, period, point blank. When you start to do that, you start to shift resources, you start to shift money away from things like threat hunting, being able to identify those attackers inside my environment, maturing my automation and orchestration so I can beat that dwell time, so I can do it at scale, I can do it with less people. And so, look, I hope the funds continue to increase. And I hope from a vendor perspective, we're all not just ambulance chasing, the latest one in there, because that's not what they need. What healthcare needs to do is fundamentally rethink the strategies that they put in place for digital transformation and information technology, and include built-in security technologies into those. So what I'm encouraged by is, as people are starting to, look at rewriting a lot of these really crappy 3-tier apps that have been written and start to bring those into an app modernized world, to start to containerize those. Well, heck, those tools have a bunch of guardrail solutions in them that help you build better code, in the beginning, right? So essentially looking at, securing that entire life cycle from the time that it's developed to the time it's in production to change management. Great. We're taking some swings at those, but it's going to take a while for healthcare, right? They have one of the largest footprints of legacy systems on the planet, right? And so you have a lot of technology that's modern that can't be deployed on some of this stuff. And then, of course, all of the medical devices that go with it as well. Before I wrap up the healthcare discussion, the last thing I would like to say is I've been really encouraged with a lot of the groups that I've been meeting with in healthcare. Manufacturers themselves of devices are starting to hear from their consumers in healthcare that have large checks. And they're saying what you have to do is start to bake in security into these technologies. We want some detective controls. We want some preventative controls. And so the industry and vendors are starting to respond to that. And I think that is encouraging and will help, long-term for healthcare.
I'd like to stress something here. The majority of the healthcare attacks on the healthcare sector began in the fall. The majority of the attackers were Russian speaking. This should be a red line. This is an act of terrorism. Not only to target healthcare providers, but to do so during a pandemic is an act of terrorism. And any nation state that harbors these types of terrorists who are going after healthcare facilities and hospitals during a pandemic, needs to bring those criminals and terrorists to account. And I will underline that 3 times from Sunday. In 2 weeks, there's going to be a seminal summit in Geneva, Switzerland, and I very much hope this gets resolved.
TK, I think you made a key distinction there. A lot of times people will say cyber warfare, right? Cyber war. That looks a little different. This idea that it's cyber terrorism, I think, is more relevant and probably a more apt description of what's occurring, especially when you consider that a lot of these groups, wink, wink, nod, nod, don't work for the government, but maybe get a pass, from the government entities so that they're not prosecuted.
I couldn't agree more, and I think Rick and TK especially, I think at that point you bought in and you've really pivoted the thought process there, and it's absolutely right that we should be thinking in this way. First and foremost, it just isn't acceptable, and you highlighted that in that sense, and I completely agree. I think secondly as well is we've got to actually understand who we're dealing with. And I think that the Colonial Pipeline was a great example where Rick, you and I spoke about this, and it's almost like how dare you send an apology. You can't apologize for attacking someone.
Yeah, not only that, but understand your targets, right? Like say what you will about intelligence groups across the globe, right? Whether they're based in the U.S. or whether they're based somewhere else. But there's confirmation of targets before they, right? So one of the things we have to look at is collateral damage in the cyber sense is very real. There were people on the East Coast affected by gas prices rising. Some of those people couldn't get to work because they couldn't actually get gas. Now, I think what we need to look as a society is start to look at the resiliency and, decentralizing some of these things, right? It's just helpful from an overall disaster perspective to not say have 2 ports on the West Coast that take 80% of all things that come in, right? I was watching a thing last night and then I was like, yeah, that's not the pandemic that caused these supply chain shortages. It's really the way we designed it. And then all the pandemic did was show up and highlight all of these areas that we've gaffed off over time, that we haven't spent time on, and that we haven't truly built our systems to. And if now's not the time to do it, I don't know another event that will represent the time to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It exposed the cracks. It absolutely exposed the cracks. And again, you pointed on a really big point there in the sense of if this is not a good time, then you're probably not going to have a great time. And also when we think about that, and an important point you brought up earlier, and you really set this and teed this up, is we had no choice but to build digital transformation overnight. We moved application to the cloud, but at that same time, we've actually got an opportunity, and I think this really sets us up to conclude today in the sense of what should we be doing, and what's your advice for our listeners today as well, in setting up and turning that and using this opportunity that we do have in front of us to ultimately build better security landscapes. And the word resiliency as well, it's something that's close to my heart. That word resiliency is so important as well. How do we make ourselves more resilient to ultimately to cyber attacks of the future? TK, if you want to jump in on this one, I think it'd be great to
you just have to appreciate that the game has changed. Worst case scenario has changed. Your infrastructure will be used to attack your customers, and it could escalate to a destructive event. Given that, you need to defend yourself from inside out, and you should be regularly conducting threat hunting on a weekly basis, and that should inform your near-term strategy. Long-term strategy, you should be employing workload security. You should be integrating your network detection and response with your endpoint protection platforms, and you should force feed the developer community in your organization, since everyone's an IT company now, with guardrails and container security such that they don't create some sort of systemic risk in the long run.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And Rick, how about yourself?
Yeah, look, step one, if you want a real tactical project, put MFA on everything that you can today. And by the way, MFA is so much easier than it was like 15 years ago. So again, that's not an end all be all. Not all systems can be MFA. However, if I can get 60, 70, 80% of my systems under MFA, well, great. Now I'm starting to contain one of the big things that all attackers do, whether it's ransomware, whether it's another piece of malware, whether it's a fileless attack. Look, what do they want? They want your credentials, and they want your identity, and they want to move around. So if I can focus around stopping them from moving around my environment and stopping them from getting my credentials, well, I don't actually care if it's a ransomware attack or a fileless attack. Literally 90% of all attacks do those two behaviors. Sweet. I don't need to go pay attention to all behaviors. I just need to go pay attention to those two, get really tight about those, start to bring in some assessment tools, start to automate some of your red team. When you're doing red team exercises, have it actually be a purple team exercise. If you want to see any guidance on that, go look at anything that Lars Consulting has put out on purple teaming. Meaning, I want my SOC team to understand the adversaries that's running around my environment. I want to understand the gaps in real time that they're missing. So I want those two teams to talk to each other. I want them to collaborate better. Those I think are very tactical things you can do today to help drive this problem down. And then as you look to the cloud, look, visibility isn't going to change. The way you gain access to that visibility, however, may change. Right. So you really got to start to vet these contracts that you put in place. Who's responsible for incident response? Who's responsible for firmware security? Those are all things you're going to have to ask yourself and come up with a plan.
Jokingly, I would just jokingly add, if you really want to be secure against many of the threats we've discussed today, just use a Cyrillic keyboard.
Well, I know you're joking about that, TK. However, I don't know the full percentage of ransomware that would stop, but I would say a lot of the new stuff.
I'd say so. I definitely would say so. And I think for me as well, and you touched on it, Rick, and really brought it. For me, there's too many organizations that focus on a prevention-only strategy. And it's completely failed when the prevention's failed. And the prevention's breached, and it exposes these cracks. It exposes the hold up a minute, actually, we should be really focusing on that, that improving the visibility, improving context. I always say, like, hey, if you get burgled in your house, but you've only got a camera on the front door, well, hey, the bad guys went through the back. You don't know where they went. You don't know what they've done. You don't know what they've stolen. You haven't got the ability to rewind the tape. So, hey, we should be focusing on making sure that we can improve that visibility, gain visibility where we can, securing the critical control points. And I think it all tees up to that. Improving your cyber resilience strategy for me, I think it's the really key point of 2021. Certainly, what I've been talking about as well. Guys, this has been, as always, fantastic. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add? We've got a couple of extra minutes. If there's anything else you'd like to add before we do start to wrap up.
I think my last thought is this, right? I'm still disappointed in us as leaders. How are we still fighting with our IT teams and not coming up with a common strategy? Look, the CIO cares about ransomware. I can guarantee you most of the conversations I have with CIOs today aren't about advanced nation state adversaries. Simply put, they want to stop ransomware in their environment, and they want to be able to tell their CEO that's the case. To do those
I'd argue that the board cares about it as well.
Absolutely. But look, to do those things, if you think information security is going to come up with a singular strategy that's enforced correctly across IT, you're wrong. If you think IT is going to come up with that strategy on their own, and in that, you're wrong. So what needs to happen? We have got to get together. And I think if we anchor around availability, which is what ransomware actually impacts, right? That's why the companies feel a sense of urgency. That's why they want to pay. But if we can anchor those two teams, and our two teams have one goal, to keep systems available, well, now I think we're at the start of a journey where we start to heal those relationships, we start to bring the teams together, and then we can actually put a plan in place to stop this thing.
I'd like to add to that. And if you're fighting for budget, you don't know where to get the budget. You got to realize this is the brand protection problem. Okay, as realized in this report, that these were material in nature of these breaches, and reputational impact was of most significance. It's high time that the chief marketing officer allocate resources to brand protection, at a minimum to better secure the mobile app, at a minimum to better secure email communications, at a minimum to secure the website itself.
Hey, it's a great point. I think you could even lead that into you're securing people's jobs as well. Brand reputation goes. You're securing people's jobs. That, again, Rick, you touched on it earlier. People having to pay extra, couldn't get to work because they couldn't get gas. At the same time, you as a security officer, you're securing people's jobs by actually making sure that you can secure the brand. In that sense, that's a great point.
Yeah, and James, just to add to that, look, I just had a really good friend, worked his butt off to build a security program. Ransomware hits at 5:30 on a Friday because someone in finance clicks on a thing. They battle the adversary. They rebuild Active Directory over the weekend because, oh, by the way, what happened a split second after the ransomware payload was sent out? Bloodhound was executed on their Active Directory. All of their accounts got popped. Right. So that being said, he'd been on the job about a year. He barely had some time to get some EDR products deployed, some SOAR products, but he was able to see the command and control. He was able to interrupt the attackers. They didn't pay the extortion. What happened on Monday? The office gets a call from the attackers, like a voice call. Hey, you said there was a network outage on your website. We know that's not true. We're going to put you on blast publicly. Give us $1 million. They refused to pay the extortion. The next morning, he gets a call on his cell phone. Now, his cell phone is not associated with anything in the company. It's not published. The attackers are now OSINT modeling him as a security professional, right? Fast forward 5 days from that, he was walked from the job. Meaning, for any business leaders that we have on this call, if you think you're going to make security progress by continually walking the head of security in 2 years, 3 years, you got to give them time to get this plan in place. Have some patience, believe in the leadership, and know that you're going to fail along the way, and it's not their fault. But have some patience with your leaders. Stop walking security leaders because there was a failure somewhere in the organization. And again, my last thought on this is, if you root cause these issues effectively enough, the organization failed. And that is a cultural statement from the top of the organization. We failed to do X. Not individual Rick McElroy as the CISO failed to do, right? And there is a whole chain of, to go in and look at what happened. But like, business leaders have to stop walking us out the door. We need 5 to 7 years to get this stuff done. And that's just the way it is. We are in a hole. And if we're going to dig out as leaders, give us some time, be patient with us, pick the right leaders, back their plays, and then measure their progress in 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's not expect to win the world championship in the first season.
Right.
It takes time.
Hey, James, why don't you talk about Connect?
It's a great point. You teed it on so well. And TK, I'm going to flip it over to yourself because I've heard not only with this, but you guys have both been extremely busy this week. So TK, jump in and let first and foremost, before that, of course, we have got our Security Connect event this week. It's a premier security event from VMware. There's over 100 sessions talking about different areas of security and also different areas of security outside of Carbon Black as well, across VMware, network security, endpoint security, workload security, thought leadership, zero trust, XDR. We touch it all. TK, what have you been up to this week at Security Connect?
I'm primarily focused on the security of the financial sector. So my speech is on modern bank heists. It's the 4th annual report that I put together with Rick. And it was really specific to what keeps the heads of financial institutions up at night, what their greatest challenges are, and how they are dealing with the future threat landscape through proactive security. So hopefully you tune in. It's a brief presentation because I'm all about TED Talks. So tune in if you can. And the presentations are going to be up for what, 90 days?
90 days.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Free access.
90 days. Absolutely. That's a key point as well. Great. Thank you, Rick. It's 90 days of access, all free. We've got over 7,000 people joining that event. So please be a part of it. whether you watch it this week, next week, July, August, it doesn't matter. With that, Rick, you've been pretty busy as well. So what have you been up to?
Yeah, I got a few sessions. Plus, we were manning, the event at 3 a.m. our time on the West Coast, but noon local time across the globe. Look, I think if you've seen me talk at RSA, I think if you've seen me at any of the Connect events, one of the things I'm super passionate about and I love to speak about is the evolution of the role of the CISO. So, not to tee up too much of the talk, but I think we're moving to that next phase as we speak. So tune in for a 20-minute talk on the evolution of the CISO. I also host another roundtable session that I found fascinating with some of our IR partners on the most common mistakes that incident responders see when they walk into an environment. And if that session isn't actionable for you to go back into your environment and make some changes, I don't know what session that is. Because when you have people like Kroll, our own threat team, some of our other partners on that session, like it's valuable information and should be used as soon as possible for teams.
No, absolutely. And personal to me as well, I was lucky enough to join our internal VMware security team. So I joined with Craig, one of our howlers as well. So Craig works in the internal VMware security and not only have him as a howler, which is, an honor to us all, we all know that, but be able to set up and have a load of fun with Craig about talking about zero trust and how VMware reimagined security utilizing zero trust strategy. For me, I learned so much. I got a real insight into how we do it for 32,000 remote users, which is fascinating, to be honest. As we close out today, and let's keep on the topic of Security Connect, taking away from our own sessions, because of course we get personal about them. And I certainly have one that I think is fascinating. For both of you, is there a session that you want to point our listeners to outside of our own that you think is a fascinating session?
Yeah, and I'm going to mess the name of the session up, so I'm actually going to look it up while I'm talking. There is this threat hunting session that was put together that seems like everyone who's attended it has sent positive feedback based on it. And let me just make sure I get this name right. It is the Threat Hunting and Incident Response Cases with Carbon Black Cloud and SIM by Ben Tedesco, also a howler. That session has been blowing up all day. So I know I learned stuff out of that. And then that's the one I would highly recommend if someone's out there hunting or doing incident response to attend.
DK, how about yourself?
Well, I'm going to have to hear Patrick Morley's keynote to understand on a personal level, the long-term strategy for the significant investment we've made in security and how we're changing the subculture of VMware to be a security company. Yeah,
I think, for me, I think that's, again, and not to jump on, but I know we spoke about it, but Patrick's keynote is truly fascinating. I was lucky enough to get an insight to that beforehand. And also as well, another session that I found fascinating, we've got the three CTOs across VMware with Workspace ONE, Scott Lundgren, our very own Scott as well, really building zero trust as a joint VMware strategy, which I think is really important for us all. Really resonates and shows not only with Patrick's really level setting on VMware security strategy, but also Scott then really elevating that to a zero trust strategy from within. So, for me, that's been a really exciting session to see come to life. And again, we've had, I know, so much great feedback on that. Guys,
anytime Scott Lundgren speaking, anytime Patrick Morley speaking, definitely tune into the session. Like Scott, I'll watch any session that he does because I always learn something from Scott. Yeah.
I agree, and I'm going to elevate that. And any session that TK or Rick is speaking as well, I'm there. So there we go. And we can wrap up with that. Guys, as absolutely always, it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to host you guys and talk about the Global Security Insights report. I know how much work and effort goes into that report, so I want to say, and from everyone at VMware Carbon Black and VMware, a huge thank you for putting that report together. Every year, it comes out with some fascinating and fantastic results, and really, I think every single one of our listeners can really take a lot back. So it's a personal thank you to you both for that.
No, and just to add to that, Sam, Carrie, the marketing team, the TAL team, our partners over at Last Line, like all of the people that kick in that you don't see their names on the report, because generally it's going to, TK and I are publishing a lot of this stuff, but I can guarantee you it is powered by an entire team that cares about your security and is trying to hopefully give you information to, again, empower you to go back and drive some better outcomes. So on behalf of myself and the rest of VMware, thanks to everyone who kicked in on this report. Team UK, was huge. Sophie, so many people, like I'm going to forget all the people I mentioned, but thank you.
Alex, Sophie, Chaz, of course, as well, everyone.
Next time we're going to do this in person in Palo Alto. Next time you see the three of us on your screen, we're going to be together.
Oh, I can't wait.
I can't wait. We've been teeing this up, and this is going to, we're unlocking a little bit of the secret, but this is, we're going to be in that studio out in Palo Alto. I've already started to catch a little bit of suntan because it's great weather here in the UK as well, so I'm getting myself set up. And of course, lastly, let's say a massive thank you to all of our listeners, taking time out of your busy schedules, however early or late it is. As always, it's a pleasure to host this session and of course have you all join. I hope, of course, you find it valuable and get everything you need out of it. Anything that you want to hear about, please send in your feedback, and we want to know ultimately what you want us to talk about, especially on the Ask the Howlers session as well. And with that. Ask the Howlers, 3 weeks tomorrow, 3 weeks today even, Ask the Howlers. I'm going to be joined by Craig from our VMware security team, and I am so excited to host that session. So with that, I'm going to close it out. Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, TK. Have a great day. Take care.